What we are watching right now is not just the fallout from a single resignation or one internal dispute. It is something much larger and more structural. The coalition built around Trump is no longer growing. It is aging, thinning out, and slowly pulling itself apart. Political movements are not permanent. They rise, dominate for a period of time, and then lose momentum. Most of them burn intensely for about a decade before fatigue sets in. Trump entered the national stage in the middle of the last decade, and now we are more than 10 years removed from that moment. What we are seeing feels less like a sudden collapse and more like the natural end phase of a movement that has reached its sell-by date. Welcome to Political Plot, where we cut through the noise to reveal the power plays shaping American politics. Today we're diving into how the Trump political coalition is entering its natural end phase, fracturing not because of one resignation or scandal, but because the movement has reached the limits of its lifespan. What looks like chaos is really expiration, as power centralization, leadership fatigue, and post-Trump positioning quietly pull the coalition apart. The harder question is, what could possibly bring this coalition back together? The answer is uncomfortable. It would likely take an existential threat to Trump himself. If his power were directly challenged, you might see factions that are quietly drifting away suddenly snap back together out of self-preservation. Ironically, there are people within his orbit who almost seem to be hoping for that kind of moment because it would force clarity. Short of that, the coalition is drifting, and drift is deadly in politics. This moment has been made worse by leadership decisions that have left lawmakers feeling sidelined and powerless. When representatives are kept away from Washington during major governing crises, it sends a terrible message to their constituents. It makes them look irrelevant. Nothing is more humiliating for an elected official than having to admit they are not part of the process. That kind of humiliation breeds anger, and anger eventually turns into rebellion. The situation is complicated by the perception that House leadership is not acting independently, but rather as an extension of Trump. That perception suppresses open revolt. Members may be furious, but they hesitate to move against leadership because they know who stands behind it. Still, the warning signs are everywhere. When rank-and-file lawmakers work with the other party to force votes because leadership refuses to act, that is not strategy. That is failure. It means the party is no longer rowing in the same direction. The resignation that triggered this conversation did not create these problems. It exposed them. Quietly, many lawmakers are admitting they share the same frustrations. They do not want to be seen as nothing more than an arm of the White House, especially when policies that sound strong in theory land poorly in reality. Economic pain, rising costs, and chaotic execution have left members defending outcomes they did not shape and cannot fully explain. This tension hits a specific generation hardest. These are Republicans who came into office after the Bush era and before Trump fully defined the party. They adapted to the movement, benefited from it, but never fully belonged to it. Many have now been in Congress long enough to read the warning signs. Once people start talking openly about leaving, that idea spreads quickly. Perception becomes reality. When lawmakers believe the majority is slipping away, job offers start to look more appealing than another brutal campaign. This is the season when those decisions get made. Family conversations during the holidays, filing deadlines approaching, a growing sense that the next election cycle could be unforgiving. When enough people choose the exit, the math changes fast. Open seats multiply, momentum shifts, and suddenly the question is no longer whether trouble is coming, but how severe it will be. What makes this moment especially corrosive is how power has been centralized. Congress feels increasingly ornamental. Influence, persuasion, and decision-making have been pulled upward. Committees feel weakened. Rank-and-file members feel invisible. This frustration exists on both sides of the aisle, but it is especially destabilizing for a party that claims to value institutional strength. At the same time, you can feel the quiet repositioning happening beneath the surface. Ambitious figures are already thinking beyond Trump, carving out lanes and signaling to different parts of the coalition. That behavior is a classic sign of a movement entering its lame duck phase. Attention shifts from preservation to succession. Once that happens, unity becomes almost impossible to restore. There is a temptation to search for one dramatic trigger that explains everything, but the simplest explanation is usually the right one. Political movements have shelf lives. They rise to meet a moment, and they fade when that moment passes. What we are seeing now is not an accident, it is expiration.